Really great art should not only leave you with a feeling, which this certainly does, but it should educate you in some way at the same time.
Go subscribe, yeah, subscribe.
Oh, we got a lot to talk about today. Welcome to Brews and Reviews. I am Knowledge. I'm reviewing billywoods and preservations, Aethiopes. I'd say billywoods is a fan favorite of the underground, one of the most well-respected artists of hip-hop fans that are really in the know, but not a household name to casual fans. He's coming off of last year's Haram with Armand Hammer, his project with Elucid, and that was on many people's AOTY list, due in part to Alchemist handling the beats in full on that. But now he's getting to work with another producer, not as well known as Alchemist, but a very talented one at that. That is DJ Preservation, also just known as Preservation, whose own album, Eastern Medicine, Western Illness, is a highlight to me. He captured a lot of the Eastern world music influence on that. Some of that you'll hear carry over into this, some of those same sounds, but it's interesting that he's moving from that Eastern region more into the African region in the subject matter on this album. This album is called Aethiopes, and just with the title and the cover alone, there's a lot to break down. I'm not going to be able to get to all of it in the short time frame that I have, but the title in particular, it could refer to people from Ethiopia or a specific region of Africa, or it could be the more racist sense where people just call everybody from Africa Ethiopians. But it may also mean, if you go back to the original Greek word Aethiopes, and I'm going to quote from Wikipedia here. Greek word Ethiopia is a compound derived of two Greek words meaning burn and face. As such, it was a vague term for dark-skinned populations since the time of Homer. I'm going to say that billywoods probably had that definition in mind as well, especially as we start unfolding some of the subject matter of this album. Let's get into it. Asylum is the first track. Keep in mind as we're listening to this that billywoods spent time growing up in Zimbabwe. His father was Zimbabwean, and immediately we see the Ethiopia concept as he mentions Mengistu Haile Mariam, a former Ethiopian dictator who committed genocide and was eventually overthrown and sought asylum in Zimbabwe. The beat here is very intricate with added elements at various points, a technique that Preservation will use throughout, just throwing in random sounds here and there. You can hear an example of this right after Billy mentions strange music. And there's a chaotic jazz organization on the chorus, not the most chaotic jazz we'll hear on this project, but a very interesting off-tempo one, which adds to the uneasy feeling in the story that he's telling. And ultimately, this is about the powerful getting away with murder and being able to blend into the crowd in a new life. No hard feelings. Woods has a way of telling an abstract story where you get a general sense and picture in your mind through a lot of abstract descriptions. And this is about someone smoking crack. No hard feelings indeed, as hard is a slang term for crack, with soft being coke. To illustrate this colorful yet abstract story, take these lines. He says, "That's that empty pipe hissing, that's him crying and twitching. That's the vanishing point in the distance. Between us, just the glass thickness. Cracked mirrors flash rictus. Skin pulled tight to the skull, that's the sickness." And you just get that image of a crackhead with their skin tight to the skull. Wharves, now we're getting really deep lyrically and deep into some of the symbolism that Billy's going to use throughout. Wharves, he's talking about waterborne cannibals cracking meat out of claws. What exactly is going on here? Billy uses symbolism and pretty gruesome imagery to portray a real-life gruesome story of European colonizers who came to Africa and other lands by boat, and they were pouring onto these lands like God's semen, as he puts it. Obviously, that's white, and there's a lot of them just pouring in to wreak havoc. The cannibalism in the chorus represents how they destroyed people and lands acting like animals. It was the whites who were savages, using the resources and having no regard for human life, infecting native people with viruses. For example, like when the Europeans came to North America and gave the Native Americans blankets filled with smallpox. And savage was a word that these colonizers used to make the native population seem like less than. So it's really creative here how Billy flips that term on its head. And it really was, if you think about what was going on, it was that white colonizing history that was pure savagery. That theme continues with Sauvage. These beats are so crazy and unique, and this is somehow the perfect one for both Boldy James and Billy Woods, as different as their styles are. And I'm very happy to hear Boldy here. He had the #4 album for me last year, and this seems like an unlikely pairing, but it does actually work very well. And I say it's an unlikely pair given how sophisticated Woods' subject matter can get versus Boldy, who rhymes about crack a lot. But before he rhymes about crack on this one, he slips in a dope way of wording his feelings of emptiness, stepping up his lyrical game. For Billy, a little bit, he says, dug down in my soul and did some soul searching. All I found was a police report for a missing person. Wood's verse further illustrates all the pain that comes out of growing up in an underprivileged neighborhood like he grew up in DC. Sauvage is French for wild or savage, again, as he describes a kid who kills his uncle and is numb to the emotion of it. He describes other classmates who got involved in police cases, and a dude who fell off a dirt bike and became disabled, and a woman who can only express herself through sex. He says, everything we say mispronounced, flipped and bounced. Use the wrong word on the phone, SIM cards are switching out. Superstitious, cut my face out the pictures. Apartment complex as a speed bump for the stick-ups. Doldrums. Here is an extended metaphor about the dry moments in waiting for supply when selling drugs. The doldrums, a nautical term for the wind not blowing, but also a term for boredom. Little double entendre there. So he uses the weather imagery to describe the moments between meeting with the plug. You got to make sure that you're working in between those moments. Otherwise, muchos problemos, as he says. NYNEX. Billy wastes no time getting deep lyrically. He says, quinine powder and alcohol stir until dissolved. The future isn't flying cars. It's Rachel Dolezal absolved. So much said in these two lines. Quinine powder was a treatment used by the white colonizers to overcome malaria, and that's what the disease that they faced that was new to them when visiting African countries. And this quinine powder allowed them to recover to further exploit the nations and brutalize the people to a point that evolved over time to completely stealing their identity, which is symbolized by Rachel Dolezal, who was the activist who claimed to be black for many years, taking on an African-American persona, but was eventually proven to be white. So Woods is showing us this crazy timeline where from the beginning, black people were viewed as savages all the way to now where white people can steal that very identity and want and claim to be black. All of this plays further into that Greek definition of Aethiopes as a racial slur. But we got to digress for a minute from these dense lyrics to talk about this beat. This is a straight, dirty beat. I love the harmonica on the chorus, and Preservation uses so many non-traditional hip-hop instruments. It just makes everything he's doing here very interesting. And Woods is joined on this track by his partner in rhyme, Elucid, as well as Denmark Vessey and Quelle Chris. And I've only heard Denmark on guest spots, but he also has some good lines that play into the anti-colonial and anti-capitalism themes, he says, subjugation is the mother of invention. Someone's pain is some other motherfucker's pension. Your daddy was a rich man, stole an invention. Christine, named after the Stephen King novel, which Woods has said he's read a lot. It was about a car that became possessed. I wouldn't expect Woods is reading something that surface level. I don't know, but I haven't read it. I gotta check it out. I've read a few Stephen King books. Not this one in particular. Sounded stupid to me, but if Billy Woods likes it, I gotta check it out. Nevertheless, I think Woods' story that he's crafting here is much better and steeped in tradition at that. The beat, first of all, has a very dark, spooky feeling. Billy comes on in that abstract storytelling again. He's describing a horror scene. He says, black car on a black street, little me asleep on the back seat, lulled by street lamps and the blackness in between, my parents' argument picking up speed in and out of bad dreams. Note that this is the second time in the album where his parents are fighting only as a minor detail behind what was really going on. So it's almost as if he always recalls that in the background of all his childhood memories. The chorus on this is an interpolation of Bob Marley's Mr. Brown, which was actually written in part by Lee Scratch Perry, who will come up later and probably at other points on this album too. But the song Mr. Brown is based on a Jamaican urban legend of a demon that rides around in a coffin. I love how after Billy's verses, the drums drop and rhythm seems to slow, adding even more tension with that sitar riff. And Mike Ladd's voice comes in powerful over the soft, dark sounds. And he says, fuck 23andMe, mom's an inventor. 23andMe is the DNA testing to see where you come from. So in one sense, by saying fuck that, he's saying that he's an original, but also this genealogy, this DNA that was tainted by these colonizers and spread people from native African countries all over the world and raped and pillaged them at that. He's saying fuck that ancestry also. And he goes on to give us a history lesson throughout this. I hadn't heard of Mike Ladd before, but I've looked into him a little bit since, and I got to check out more of his stuff. This whole track works so well. I'm going to drink to this track. I am sipping on an Asahi. This is a Japanese lager coming in at 5.2%. I had to stay away from the European drinks on this one, and I didn't really know of any African beers. If you know of any, let me know in the comments. So I picked a Japanese beer, but you know, I was reading a little more, and this is actually brewed in Italy. What the hell? These white people, they will appropriate everything. You can't win here, but it's still a good beer, so I'm sipping on it. The original Japanese recipe. Let's get back to the album. Heavy Water. The juxtaposition of this and the previous track is perfect. They fade right into each other, but the previous one had those soft riffs, and now we got this anxiety-producing, high-energy track featuring Breeze Brewin and LP, and this could have been produced by LP, with Preservation giving a nod to him, really, in this production style. And speaking of LP, he's got some great lines as these MCs trade short verses. He says, brutalist blue boys moving, they shooting, nothing new, Google Chrome if confusing. He's talking about the cops killing people and how the footage of them using their Chrome can be found on the internet. Of course, a double entendre with the brand name Google Chrome. And Woods continues the themes of exploitation of black people and Africa, talking about how whites used to play black people in black and white movies, and how the Queen of England wore the gold of black emperors as they colonized Africa, scarification across her breasts. So that serves several levels, talking about the scarification that was common in African countries for females, especially at the time, but also the scars that England left on that nation by exploiting them and taking their gold. Haarlem. This album is so next level, man. These lyrics are so great. Notice the Haarlem has two A's. Of course, when we see the title Haarlem, we're thinking Harlem, New York, Harlem Renaissance, and what that meant in black culture. But this is Haarlem with two A's. It is talking about the region of the Netherlands, which also plays into black history in an unfortunate way. First, let me talk about this nice hyper bass line on the first part of the track where Woods discusses the nuances of Zimbabwe's history. And here's where Lee Scratch Perry comes up again, because he's got a song called Super Ape. But what Woods is saying here is much deeper than that song. And he says, Super Ape put a candle in a skull for a lantern, lighted Dutch in Haarlem, Amsterdam, steps of a mansion. Speaking Afrikaans, British accent, I want mine from back when. Thebes said the wind get the ashes in the end, bruv. There's a lot going on here. I'm going to break it down backwards. Thebe, of course, references Earl Sweatshirt, and he quotes one of his songs here, but also he's saying the African accent is spoken by black people in Africa is tainted by colonialism, and he wants his original way of speaking back. But it's really interesting, referring to Haarlem, a Dutch city. Obviously in Amsterdam, you could light a Dutch, aka smoke a blunt, because drugs are legal. But just before that, he's talking about using a skull for a lantern. So this is like a Dutch person who has invaded Africa, trying to colonize it, and he's been killed by a local and used as a lantern. The beat switch here goes completely left field into some frenzied tension-filled jazz keys, and the song descends into complete chaos with Fatboi Sharif's non sequitur spittin'. Versailles veers somewhat into familiar territory for Billy Woods, kind of an anti-capitalist themes. It seems to be about robberies and the drug game, the rich robbing the poor and turning a cold shoulder to their plight. They've got the poor addicted to drugs while they just keep getting richer and richer and richer, or as Billy explains it, as capital gains and gains and gains. Protoevangelium means the first gospel, and it's from the book of Genesis, where God declares that the snake and the offspring of Eve will be at war forever. And Billy seems to use this as a line between him and hucksters in the game, as well as fake revolutionary rappers who are just trying to pay the rent by saying whatever, while he's focused on black empowerment through his music. Remorseless, another incredible beat, and this one is a lot like what we heard on his Eastern Medicine album. Eastern Medicine, like I've got right here, and more ponderings on capitalism, from burning down the shining city on the hill to gambling in a job at a Dollar Tree to earn a buck, but then he's giving it away due to the American capitalism concept of gambling, all the way to saying that African proverbs and communist teachings of Karl Marx shouldn't be broken down to simplicity and word bites, in a sense, and memes to just be put out there for profit, like the hallmark concept of Karl Marx. Both African proverbs and socialist ideas are much more complex than that and shouldn't be used to sell anything that goes against the very ideas that they represent in the first place. Billy puts a nice bow on all these concepts by saying, I'm not concerned with generational wealth. That's its own curse. Anything you want on this cursed earth, probably better off getting it yourself. See what it's worth. You do respect things more when you earn them yourself rather than just being given them. But this generational wealth idea that we have in America will come back to play in the next track. Smith and Cross, this is named after the Jamaican rum and references the drink and how it's made from sugar that turns into molasses, that turns to rum. And it talks about the cane fields. And really here you may think he's just talking about drinking some rum, but Billy Woods wouldn't do that. This is much deeper, and the rum is a metaphor for slavery by white colonists in Jamaica who brought over Africans to work in these cane fields so they could produce this rum. And that's the generational wealth that started to build for the white colonizers and their offspring. But here he talks about generational trauma. So they inflicted this generational trauma on Africans and their ancestors just to create this generational wealth from themselves that came from cash crops like sugar. This is extremely symbolic because there was a slave rebellion in Jamaica in 1831 where many of the fields and slave owners' houses were burned down. And this is a great way to cap off the album with rebellion against the colonialism that he's been talking about throughout and the ramifications to this day. And he's maybe saying rebel against this generational trauma and their generational wealth at the same time. This is incredible. Wood's grasp of history, a history unknown to many, mixes with his mastery of words and abstract yet descriptive imagery and storytelling to create a didactic, good listening experience. Preservation laces him with a backdrop that is as complex and esoteric as his lyrics, and I learned a lot just listening and digging into this album. And really great art should not only leave you with a feeling, which this certainly does, but it should educate you in some way at the same time. To both ends, Woods accomplishes that goal, and because of that, I'm going to give this a 10 out of a 12 pack. Thanks for watching my review of Billy Woods' Aethiopes. If you like this, go ahead and hit like now and hit me up in the comments. If you didn't like it, also let me know why in the comments. I drop hip-hop and hops-related content consistently, so subscribe to my channel now. And until I see you next time, keep buzzing.
Look, man says subscribe. But if he's on his channel saying that somebody's album is better than mine, unsubscribe to him.
No, your album's the best, man.
There you go. Subscribe.
Yeah.
Subscribe.